A. Patience, and the ability to see several steps ahead of his enemies. In New York, Gambino entered the criminal underworld during the Prohibition era, when bootlegging alcohol was one of the most profitable trades. He joined a crew under the influence of Salvatore, Toto, D'Aquila, and later became aligned with Joe Masseria. But Carlo was not a man who moved rashly. He carefully observed the shifting alliances and conflicts among mafia bosses. When the Castellamarese War broke out between Joe Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano in the late 1920s, Carlo sided with Maranzano, who ultimately won. This choice helped Gambino climb higher in the mafia ranks. Yet, when Maranzano himself was killed after declaring himself boss of bosses, Gambino survived once again by aligning with the winners, this time with Lucky Luciano and his allies. This adaptability became one of his most remarkable strengths. He was never the loudest or most violent, but always the most calculating. Through the 1930s and 1940s, Gambino quietly built his reputation. He was a man who preferred staying out of the limelight. While others sought fame, Carlo valued invisibility. He invested his time in bootlegging, gambling, and loan sharking, but never with reckless showmanship. His intelligence allowed him to understand that the real power in the mafia was not about being feared for violence but respected for control and decision-making. Unlike other mobsters, Gambino avoided unnecessary bloodshed. He knew violence attracted law enforcement, and the key to longevity was making money quietly. This careful strategy allowed him to outlast many of his rivals who were either killed or imprisoned. By the 1950s, Gambino was a powerful capo in the Mangano crime family, which later became known as the Gambino family. When Albert Anastasia, the fearsome boss known as the Lord High Executioner, took control of the family, Carlo waited patiently. Anastasia was notorious for his brutality, running the infamous Murder, Inc. organization that carried out countless assassinations. But his recklessness made him vulnerable. Gambino, with his patient and calculating nature, saw an opportunity. In 1957, with the support of Vito Genovese and other mafia allies, Gambino plotted Anastasia's assassination. Anastasia was gunned down while sitting in a barber chair, and Gambino rose to become the boss of what would soon be the most powerful mafia family in America. As boss, Carlo Gambino transformed the family into an empire. He expanded into construction, trucking, unions, and legitimate businesses, using them as fronts for illegal operations. The Gambino family became deeply involved in extortion, labor racketeering, hijacking, and narcotics. Under his leadership, the family grew to control thousands of soldiers and associates, with influence stretching across the country. Gambino's rule was marked by discipline and order. He demanded loyalty and silence from his men, rewarding them with wealth but punishing betrayal with quiet ruthlessness. He rarely raised his voice, but his authority was absolute. To outsiders, he seemed almost invisible, earning him the nickname, the Godfather of Godfathers. One of Carlo Gambino's greatest strengths was his ability to manage relationships. He forged alliances with other mafia families while carefully avoiding unnecessary wars. At the same time, he maintained influence over unions, particularly in the garment district and shipping docks, which gave him enormous power over the flow of goods in New York. Politicians, businessmen, and law enforcement often looked the other way because of his influence. Unlike other bosses who flaunted wealth with expensive suits, flashy cars, or nightclubs, Carlo lived modestly in a small house in Brooklyn with his wife and children. He preferred family dinners to nightlife, keeping a low profile that kept him safe from unwanted attention. Even in his dealings with law enforcement, Gambino showed patience and intelligence. Though arrested several times, he always managed to avoid long prison sentences. He had excellent lawyers, loyal underlings who never testified against him, and an almost untouchable reputation. By avoiding drugs directly, though some of his men engaged in narcotics trafficking, he reduced the risk of severe government crackdowns. This decision helped him survive in an era when many mafia bosses were targeted for drug-related activities. Despite his low-key style, Carlo Gambino was both feared and respected. Fear came from the knowledge that betrayal meant death, often swift and silent. Respect came from his ability to provide for his men, settle disputes fairly, and protect the organization from chaos. Many mobsters considered him the model boss, someone who blended old-world values with modern criminal strategy. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Gambino was recognized as the most powerful mafia boss in America, even surpassing the influence of the Genovese family. He was often seen as the unofficial head of the entire commission, the governing body of the American mafia. Carlo Gambino's reign lasted longer than most mob bosses because of his discipline and wisdom. He lived by the old mafia code: loyalty, silence, and respect, and avoided arrogance that often brought down other leaders. His story was not one of flashy headlines but of quiet domination. By the time he grew older, his empire was vast, and his power unmatched. Unlike many bosses who died violently, Gambino lived to old age, passing away from natural causes on October 15, 1976, at the age of 74. His death marked the end of an era, but his legacy continued. The family he built, carrying his name, remained one of the most powerful mafia organizations in the United States for decades. The story of Carlo Gambino is a rare one in the brutal world of organized crime. While many mafia bosses fell to bullets, betrayals, or prison cells, Gambino's intelligence, patience, and restraint allowed him to rule for nearly 2 decades without suffering the same fate. He was feared for the quiet certainty of his justice and respected for his ability to lead with wisdom rather than reckless violence. To this day, his name is remembered not just as a gangster but as the embodiment of the mafia ideal. A man who rose from a poor Sicilian immigrant to the most powerful and respected mafia boss in America, leaving behind a legacy of both fear and admiration.